I'm going to multitask here while I admit everyone. I'm also going to welcome you to this session and welcome you to the day, to the Ohio State-wide Family Engagement Leadership Summit. And we're so glad that you could join us on this day of professional learning, meant to take family, school, community partnership to the next level. My name is Beth Crawford, and I will be this session's moderator. This session is session number 1, how to push forward with caregivers instead of pushing back. If you have any questions, concerns, or technical issues, please message me privately in the chat. To ensure that we all get the most out of the day, we're asking that all participants turn off your webcams and microphones. If you have questions for the presenter, just use the chat feature and I'll pass them along. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag #ChartNewTerritories to share your thoughts. At this point, I will turn things over to our speaker, Dr. Sharon Custer. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here. When I start thinking about family engagement, I just start grinning ear to ear. I've been at my university full time for about 7 years now, and I miss families. I really, really do. This morning, I was teaching a class to teacher education majors on mandated reporting. And I just kept saying, if you really want to prevent child abuse, get a good relationship with parents because they need your support and those partnerships are so important. So to end a week talking about one of my favorite things makes me really excited. Prior to coming to Miami, I was at the Butler County Educational Service Center for a number of years supporting different programming there. I was the director of wraparound, and I saw Linda. I have to give a shout out to her. She was one of our founding members that's joining us today. And that's really where I had, I think, some of the biggest ahas with families during my social work career, because it just felt like so many meetings ended up being adversarial, and it just felt like we were constantly fighting and negotiating. And the reality was, if you looked at what our goal was, we really wanted to be working on the same things. We were just doing it in different ways. And one of the things I've learned over the years is oftentimes it's not about what you want to do, it's about how you want to work on it. And so I thought we'd do some fun activities today to think about our own conflict styles and the way that we manage difficult situations and communicate with families and our peers when things aren't going so well. And then thinking about how can we maybe do things a little bit different based on those conflict styles, as well as thinking about collaboration strategies and ways to reframe caregivers' actions. Because oftentimes those passionate behaviors are really about advocacy and fear and not so much about power. And unfortunately, sometimes that's how it comes across. So I'm going to do my best to monitor the chat, but definitely would love to hear, as we're going. I know we only have an hour together, and I always over plan. I probably have way more slides than we're going to get through today. But I want to be able to support your needs as well as we go. So what we're going to do, this is not a normed, valid, or reliable assessment, but it's a fun one. And I think it's really brought some great discussion over the years when I've used it, is I want everybody to do their conflict style resolution self-assessment. So you should have received that in the conference materials. If you didn't, I put it into a Google Doc just in case, and I can put that, oh, Beth is already ahead of me. I think she's got the handouts in the chat for you. So let's just take a couple minutes and go ahead and rate those areas. And then at the bottom, you'll see a scoring sheet, and that is going to tell you what type of conflict style that you best align with. The odds are you're probably going to have 2 of them, many of you that match, but when it comes later, you can kind of pick and choose. So I'm just going to stop talking for just a minute to let you concentrate. And if you have any concerns or if it's not working for you, just send us a message in the chat. For those of you who are just joining us, we are working on the self-assessment that's in the conference presentation materials to figure out what kind of conflict style we each have. And if you don't have access to it, Beth has put it in the chat again for us. Good morning. We just had a handful of people who are just joining us. We are working on the conflict style that self-assessment that is in your conference handouts. I'm gonna give it just a couple more minutes, and if you're still working on it, hopefully you can kind of half listen and half work on it. I'll give you 2 more minutes. All right, so for the scoring on the bottom, I don't have it directly in front of me because I've got too many other sheets up. You should be at the top. It should say like 1 is always and going across. And then at the bottom for question 1, hold on, let me change what I'm sharing. We can make this work, right? Give me a second. All right, so at the bottom for letter A, so if you put a 1, you always argue your case with peers, you would put a 1 here. And then whatever you put for E, you would put here. And then you would just add A, E, and G, and that's your total. And you'll do that all the way across. And then whatever your lowest score is, so if your lowest score was a collaborating owl, you would put that there. And then if your second lowest was the compromising fox, you would put that there. And again, many of you might, since there's only 3 indicators, there's a good chance you'll have 2 of them that are the same, just because unfortunately that's just the way. When you have less variables to choose from. All right, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint quick. All right, so I know some of you are probably still scoring this, but in the interest of time, and I want to make sure that we have time to chat together later too, I'm going to start kind of describing some of these. And for those of you who are tied between 2, you might say, oh yeah, this one's way more like me than the other one. And I probably should have clarified, you know, the reality is we have different styles based on who we're working with. So who I am with my spouse versus who I am with my students versus who I am with the clients I'm serving is going to look very, very different given those roles and those dynamics. The other thing that I think that's important to recognize, let me put this like that, is, you know, a lot of these, the styles we're thinking about it from like a relationship status in terms of like romantic relationships. But, so some of these you know, when you think about it, you know, it still applies, I think, to any relationship that we have. I was working with a local school just this week, and we were doing this activity within our teams, and this was an excellent opportunity for both the intervention specialists to do with the other teachers and the paraprofessionals in the room, and then we were talking about it with the students that they have in the room. If somebody's a shark and they're working with turtles, who's the best person to be supporting their needs throughout? So I'm just going to go over these briefly with you. And then I'm going to put you into small groups so that you have a chance to really process what does this mean for you in your relationships at work, with families that you're serving, with and with others. So the shark is considered competitive. And all of these have definite pros and definite, you know, some concerning behaviors that go hand in hand depending on the situation. Sharks are often leaders. They're often the first to step up and say, this is what we're going to do. They sometimes can be seen as aggressive. Sometimes they don't want to cooperate. It's their way. For some sharks, conflict is, I gotta win. It doesn't matter if I'm right. I have to be the one that wins. And I'm sure that you can, think of some sharks in your family. I know sometimes I'm in the heat of the moment with my husband and that he'll say something. I'm like, oh, he's right. But I don't want him to know that he's right. So I'm just going to change the subject a little bit, and still win this argument. So I'm definitely very shark-like in a lot of my interactions, if you couldn't tell. The turtles, on the other hand, are not worried about winning. They just want to make sure everybody's like status quo. They want to avoid conflict. They want to just keep things peaceful. Status quo is fine. Sometimes they need time to reflect and to process. But, you know, they really are kind of putting their head into their shell. And depending on the turtle, sometimes that means that they think conflict is bad, and other people think that they're apathetic or that they just don't care. When they often care a lot, but they sometimes aren't comfortable putting those, oh, I think we skipped ahead there. Oh, there it is. You know, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry, too many screens popping up on me. But the turtles often just the status quo is more comfortable than actually making sure that people are getting their needs met. Now, the fox is a compromiser. And this one sometimes gets confused with the owl. But with this one is everybody has to give a little. I care about my needs. I care about your needs. And I want to make sure that we come up with something that we both can live with. It's less time consuming than collaborative, which you'll see here in a minute. But what ends up happening is you're so quick to sometimes just find the best solution or the quickest solution to keep things moving that you don't always have the opportunity to find what's actually going to work the best for everybody. So the owl is the collaborator though. And this is the one that takes a ton of time because it's not about compromising. There's got to be an answer that works for both of us and that we're all going to be happy with. And so they are not the avoider. They're like, are you okay? Did I do something wrong? What can I do? How can we make this better? While also making sure that their needs are being met throughout. And so they've got great assertive communication. They're talking about everybody's needs. They're checking in with everybody to make sure everybody's good with everything. And what ends up happening sometimes with our owls is they get relationship burnout because it is exhausting to make sure everybody's needs are met, including your own in these situations. And then finally, we have the teddy bears. And the teddy bears are really concerned about making sure everybody just feels good. And they're not very assertive. They're not telling you what their needs are, but they're just making sure everybody's happy when it's all done. And so when you're having these kinds of relationships with families, if you're the teddy bear and you're just saying, oh, well, of course, if that's what you need, that's what we're going to do, that doesn't necessarily lead to some of those creative opportunities. So as we were going through these, you probably saw like high concern for self or high concern for others. And sometimes people see that as a negative. If you say, oh, I'm only concerned about myself, or I'm too concerned about just having a heck of a time with technology and muting. So this is, I think, a really great way to look at everybody. So if you look at the line across, the concern for others, you'll see that turtles are not worried about themselves, but they're also not worried necessarily about other people. They're just worried about it staying peaceful. And then you'll see that, that compromiser in the middle of the fox, who's right there. I have just as much concern for my needs as I have for other people's needs. Right. And then the collaborator going across is I have lots of concern for my needs and I have lots of concern for other people's. And I'm just going to keep pushing until we figure this out. So any questions on that real quick before we get into the breakout rooms? I know that was a really fast overview. And some of you are just joining this going, what the heck is going on right now? All right, so what's the point of all of this? So if you are a shark, and you are the type that is comfortable confronting people, and is trying to, just get it all out there and put it on the table, and you're working with turtles and teddy bears, that might be really uncomfortable situations. Or if you're the collaborator and you want to make sure everyone's talking, but the parent comes in as a shark and saying, this is what I need, and this is what my kid needs, and this is how it's going to be, it automatically becomes, for some people, a really awkward situation. And that's what we wanted to kind of spend some time reflecting on this morning. So those of you who are saying, how do I know what I am? There is a self-assessment link that you're welcome to try to, skim through and do as fast as you can while we're chatting to give you some sense of those different areas. And again, this is not a highly regulated, reliable indicator. It's meant to be, kind of fun and cheeky, but it does get us thinking this morning. So I'm going to put everybody into some breakout rooms. And what I want you to do in your breakout room, it looks like we have 76, and I am not as good at math as my son, who could have told me in 10 seconds what 76 divided by 4 is. I'm going to put you in groups of roughly 3 or 4, and give you a chance to chat with each other. I'd like you to talk about what style you are and how that works for you in your role. And then I want you to talk a little bit about what styles you work best with in terms of family engagement. Like when a family comes in, I personally don't like working with turtles as much as a shark. I'd rather have a parent come in passionate and excited and wanting to do the best thing for their child, because I can work with that. When a parent comes in as a turtle and is just like, whatever, I don't care, I struggle because I don't feel like their needs are going to be met. I don't feel like their children's needs are going to be met. So think about, but some of you are like, oh, I love the turtles. Then they're open to whatever, and we can really get lots of work done. So talk about what you are, how that works for you. Talk about who you like working with the most and who's the hardest to work with. And we're going to do breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and process and then keep moving forward. Well, welcome back. I'm just curious, were there any groups that had some ahas that they'd like to share out?
One of the things we talked about, one of the things we talked about in our group was the fact that how your style changes over time as you get older. You may start off one way, but as life would have it, you learn a little bit more, you get a little wiser, and how our styles have shifted. But we still may have some of that original style that in us that we may have to use from time to time, but that it does shift. Thanks.
Thank you, Krista. I think that's an excellent point. And it can shift for the better or for the worse, right? Sometimes we're wiser and more patient or understanding. And sometimes we're older and like, I'm tired and burnt out and I don't have the same energy that I used to tolerate some things that I was easier able to kind of overlook in the past. So I think, to me, it is for those of you who are supervising, like that's a really good indicator that people need to engage in some self-care, some supportive systems if they're doing that latter version. Hopefully it's for the positive that people are changing and growing. Lynn, you've got your hand up, jump in.
Hi, our group had a parent mentor in there, and it was wonderful to hear her side of it. And it was interesting because she didn't say this because she came into our group late, so she didn't get to do the thing. But she definitely has to be a shark for her son, and I'm really happy that she talked with us because it's so important that, it's okay to be a shark, because she needs to be, because she's facing systems that kind of like to do things a certain way. And sometimes education isn't always going to go exactly how you think it's going to go. So I was really happy to have her in the group.
I am so grateful. And I, we forget sometimes. And that's exactly what my point with all of this was going to be at the very end. If you get nothing else, that you recognize that parents feel like they have to be a shark before they even walk in the door. I was talking to my colleague who, she just said, why is every 504 meeting ugly? She's like, I dread them. I walk in, I just know I'm going to have to fight. And if they're not a shark by nature, but have to turn into one, then that's just so draining for people to kind of prepare themselves for those fights. And they're doing it because they love their kid and they want what's best. So yes. I'm going to share the slide later, but years and years ago, I had the opportunity to train with Dr. T. Barry Brazelton, who's a renowned pediatrician who passed away years ago. And he had a touch points philosophy, and the touch points philosophy is really a very strength-based, family-driven way of engaging with people. And one of his founding principles was you value passion wherever you find it. And, so if that passion is a parent screaming and yelling, I'm like, that's because they care. We would joke around sometimes in our wraparound teams where, this parent's mad and they're going to cuss and they're going to yell. And I'm like, yes. That's the kind of parent I want to work with, because those are the parents that really, really genuinely want what's best. And if you say to a parent genuinely, it can't be fake, I'm so glad you care enough about your child to fight this hard, it immediately creates, hopefully, and those of you who are parents, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I'm a parent of a child with some mental health needs, but when I feel like people hear me and know that I'm doing this for them, I have a lot more respect for those practitioners or those teachers. When they're just like, wow, she's a bleep, 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 it's definitely not the same. So I'm getting yes, right on, right? So, but it has to be genuine. If you say it fake, you're like, oh, you care so much, it's not going to go over well, right? So hopefully you can reframe that in your head. I also find, for those of you who are like, ooh, I'm a turtle, I don't like conflict, hopefully you feel empowered to support your families. Maybe you can't feel that same comfort level when it's for your own needs. But I tell my staff and my students who are at Miami now that, your job is to be their advocate and to be a voice sometimes when they feel that they can't, or to give them the opportunity to have a voice at the table. And so even if it's awkward for you, your job is to make sure that that pathway has been created. So if you can kind of think of it in your head, like, I have to do this, it sometimes gives people the courage they need to plow ahead and have those difficult conversations. And being a shark doesn't mean you have to be a nasty shark, right? I tell people I'm a nurse shark. I'm pretty chill. I can be very calm until you poke me enough, though, or I get really, really hungry, and then I'm going to do what I need to do. But if you do what we need to do and things are going well, I'll leave you alone if you leave me alone. Any other ahas? There are all types of sharks, yes. Okay. Well, hopefully, again, this gives you a chance. Did someone else want to speak up? Did I cut you off too quick?
I was just going to say our group were 3 people that I did not know, and it was just a good group, and I'm glad we got to break into smaller groups because they were great people, and we shared a lot and saw similarities in our styles, and just wanted to say it was good to meet new people on the summit.
That's wonderful. I think that's the best part of these conferences, and doing it virtually is a lot harder, I know, because sometimes to me going to those conferences and summits, it was the water cooler conversations between sessions that I felt like I gained the most from sometimes. So I'm glad that the way that these are set up for these engaging opportunities and not just be lecture is really important. Oh, I love the baby shark. Yes. Now everyone's going to start singing that one too, right? Okay, so let's keep moving. Of time, but hopefully again, this gives you opportunities to reflect on your own aspects of communication, as well as thinking about the families that come in. I know in my teams, we would sometimes joke around too, even here at Miami, like, are you being a turtle today? I don't need you to be a turtle. Come on, at least be a teddy bear. And so to kind of think about this with your teams as much as possible, not as much as possible, but frequently kind of makes it a little less awkward when you need to confront somebody. Okay, so one of the next half of our presentation is really, again, brainstorming ways that you can work with families moving forward in the right direction. And so when I hear people share with me, the family won't do it, they said no, they're not interested, I often say, well, ask them why. And this is the conversation. It seems so simple, but sometimes we don't. When we first started our wraparound program in Butler County, we were really trying hard to live to fidelity with our principles. And one of the key guiding principles is family voice and choice. So when a family said, no, I'm not doing that, or that doesn't interest me, we would say family voice and choice. Okay, that's okay. But then we would sometimes get stuck. And for some people, getting stuck meant that there was negativity toward that family, like, oh, they're non-compliant or they're being difficult. For others, there was no negativity, but we just couldn't move forward. And so when families say, this isn't going to work for me, and caregivers, I don't want to assume it's always families, because sometimes you're working with some non-traditional settings and other legal guardians. So I am trying to, caregivers and others in that way. Ask them why. Is it a transportation barrier? Is it they were in therapy before and it didn't work for them? Is it groups were awkward for them? Is it that, for my daughter, she doesn't do well with people, she likes people who are younger, and I'm not younger, according to her. People your age, Mom, don't get it. So when we started her therapy, we were really intentional about trying to find somebody who specialized in her needs as well as made her feel safe and comfortable. Is it that they're concerned about the money? Is it that they're private? So all of those different aspects are really important. And then and you don't have to do it confrontationally either, right? Like, why not? What's wrong with you? It can be, okay, tell me more about what your concerns are, or is there something that didn't work well for you? So when you're creating plans too, and something doesn't work, it's always important to say, let's talk about why that didn't work so well, so that we can make sure that we avoid that in the aspect. All right. So another thing that's incredibly important is to check yourself. And unfortunately, I think some of us are better at this than others, because oftentimes the barriers that are coming up have nothing to do with the family. It's about our own needs. And whether that's our paperwork, or we're tired, or we're just putting our foot down because we think we know what's best. For those of you who are familiar, there's concepts of transference and countertransference, where sometimes a client system or family reminds us of somebody else, whether it's in our personal life or a former client, and we're like, oh, we can't let that happen to them because when we did this before, it didn't work for so-and-so. And the reality is every family situation is different. Everybody's needs are different. Sometimes we're in a better place. you mentioned that before, that your times have changed. Somebody in the chat even said, I feel like I don't have to, I'm trying to find it again, but I'm not going to get the exact words, but like, I don't feel like I need to confront or fight so much as I used to in my younger years. So just making sure that it's not about you. The other thing that's really critical, and this is hard to do because the whole concept of implicit bias and bias in general is you're not sometimes even aware that you have them. But there are a lot of biases in our work, and whether that's racial or ethnic biases, gender biases, biases related to families based on income, and biases related to intellect, all of those things, sometimes we make assumptions. I know in working with, I'm the field director at Miami, so I work with all of the students who are working in their internships. And a lot of my students stay in touch with me after they graduate, and they talk about sometimes working with higher income and higher educated families as being the hardest for them because they're insecure with their own competence still as a new professional in the field. And like, we have this family that came in and they're both doctors and they're expecting me to know how to help their kid. And I'm 23 and I'm not a parent and I don't have a clue what I'm doing. And they overcompensate or under, and they just kind of shut down. And so all of these things are really critical. And there's ways to support yourself through supervision and through education. I personally am a firm believer. I have a work wife, and she's the type of person that's going to tell me, Sharon, you are out of line, or you're overreacting or underreacting. So finding that person in your roles that can tell you that, honestly, that they're going to, not tell you what you want to hear, I think is a really good resource to have in your world to help you keep yourself in line. All right, so this is a compilation of some door openers and some door closers. And some of these are going to be a lot more common sense than others. And some of these are like, are going to be some does, or I never thought of it that before. But when you're working with families, if you want to continue to move forward and to get through these kinds of things, sometimes, talk to me about how you're, okay, I'm not sure what happened there because that same, I guess I know what I did there. So for some people, talk to me about how you were feeling about this is going to be an opener. And for other people, talk to me about how you're feeling about this is going to shut it down. If you don't have trust with that family and they think that you're going to potentially use their words to twist and things like that, you could really, really damage the relationship. Or it's like, they're like, this isn't about my feelings. This is about what's going on here. So a lot of different people have been given credit for this quote, so I'm not even sure who to give it to, but I'm a firm believer that families don't care how much you know until they know that you care. And so taking the time to assess and to let them have a voice first, and to make sure that somebody even put it in the chat, it's always about what's best for the student. Absolutely. If that student or that, and some of you are not working necessarily in school settings, but if that young person or whoever that client system is, some of you might be working with, even older children who are adults or caregivers of other people, but it's really about whoever that focus is. And if they know that you care about that person and you know that they care about that person, that's that common ground, and you can overcome those other barriers. And I'm not going to read all these to you. You can see some of these. Same thing, like tell me more can be an opener. Tell me more can also be a closer. I can tell this is important to you. Okay, I'm not sure what happened here. This is not the right slide, so I apologize. I'm not sure how that got diluted, but those openers are all going to be really, really important. Let's talk about what closers are, since the slide, I feel like the silliness with the technology today. You'd think I wouldn't do this for a living. Closers are going to be more short questions, not open-ended. You're wrong. That's not going to work. Throw some more out in the chat for me. What are some door closers when working with families? What happened to them sometimes? You need to do this. I don't agree. What you need to do. Absolutely, Melissa, right? How many times have we just told families, if you just do these 3 things, I don't agree. This is how it's always done. This is what's even worked for other students. And to me, so much of it too isn't just about what you say, it's how you say it, which is that always be mindful of body language and nonverbals. I know what happened when I copied this over to the new format. That's what I copied the slide wrong. But yeah, and it is simple stuff. It's nothing that, or it's simple stuff for us to learn, but it's also making the parent feel stupid, right? How often do we do that? It shouldn't be this difficult. I think some other door closers are using too much jargon. Whenever I go to an IEP meeting with a family, even if I know every acronym and every word that they're talking about, I always pretend that I don't, because I don't want to be like, even though we know what we're talking about, let's dummy it down for this family. I'm like, oh, tell me what that is again. Is a reminder to people that not everybody uses the same language. Yes, talking above the parent, and not just words, but how many times have you all been to a meeting where they copied and pasted from something else? Talk about a door closer. This is just, like, you've shut me down when somebody else's name is on my kid's IEP. I'll tell you that right now. Sitting back in a meeting with their arms crossed, they're constantly looking at their phone. You can tell when they're just typing the whole time and they're not engaged in the conversation. All of those things can certainly shut down the parent dynamics, the caregiver dynamics immediately. So one of the ways, mispronouncing names. Yes, that's another big one. And I know that's a hard one for people, right? You're like, are you afraid to even use the name? Or so some people don't. And then I think that's also. So really being intentional. I will tell you another door closer is changing people's names. I've seen so many teachers over the years who tell students, your name's just too hard. How about we call you this? And talk about just a slap in the face to that family's identity. Now, if the kid asks for it or the young person asks for it, that's different. But I'm proud of my name. My dad named me, and even though it's not hard to pronounce, it's important to me. And I would hate to take that identity away from a family just because it's too difficult for me. So when thinking about ways that you can support families, I statements are a great way to do that. And some people get confused with I statements. I statements aren't just I begin with the word I. I've been in meetings with people like, I think you're wrong. That is not an I statement. That is just a really twisted you statement. Yes, people have actually said that in many, many ways. But it's really about your feelings and what you want and why and how that needs to happen. And so if you're struggling sometimes with how do you confront a situation and you don't want the person to feel that you're blaming them and judging them, the I statement is a great way to do that. I feel concerned when your child's not here every day because they're getting further and further behind, because they're not able to, if it's a therapeutic relationship, because we're having to, we're not making progress on the goals that you were hoping for. I feel concerned when you're not completing the paperwork because it's not allowing us to do what we need to do. Or, sometimes there's times you have to feel frustrated and anger. Those are okay, but you have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's appropriate and intentional. But I try to make it about my concerns for the child's well-being when I'm working with families, when they're not doing something. Sometimes as social workers, we're turtles and we just say, oh, they didn't do the form again. Oh, sometimes we need them to do the form because they're not going to be able to stay in the program, or we need this assessment done, or we want to have things done and we need to confront the situation. I try not to think of confrontation as adversarial. I think of confrontation as productive ways to support each other. So another way that we can support families is through active listening. And there's 3 ways that we think about listening. The first is more factual. This is what happened. Second is emotional, where you're drawing to what the frustration they might have, or I can't even imagine what that's going through. And then the third one you have to be careful with because it's solution focused. There are times in, I think, our family's roles where having someone give us some solution is really helpful. There are other times where I don't need people to tell me what I need to do as a parent. So when I'm in crisis mode, and I remember my doctor years ago asking me, well, how do you want to handle it? And I thought my kid was having some tumor issues and there were some serious health concerns and I was just in panic mode. I'm like, you're the doctor, you tell me. That's when I need solution-focused active listening. But most of the time, I really try to stick to the facts and the emotions that they're having when I'm reflecting back with them to make sure. And what this active listening does is a lot of people are like, why would you repeat what they're saying? Well, you want to make sure that you're on the right track. Sometimes what we hear is not really what the family's meaning to say. And so that active listening just slows the conversation down and makes sure that we're really thinking and saying the same thing, because sometimes the intention and perception doesn't always match up. All right. And then I've already shared with you the value passion wherever you find it from touch points, but I just want to say it again, because that passion, whether it's negative energy, positive energy, excitement, frustration, anger, really is about loving their young person, whether that's their child, their foster child, their grandchild, whoever that they're taking care of. And if you can constantly refresh and remind yourself that that's what that passion is, then you don't get so frustrated and you don't get so burnt out, and you don't see it as adversarial for you. You see it as they're a shark protecting their baby, right? They're a mama bear, and this is what needs to happen. So hopefully these techniques of valuing passion, active feedback, practicing some I statements can help us reframe situations and think about families a little bit different. So our final activity, and what I want to do with you, is spend just a couple minutes, and we'll use the chat for this if you want. Actually, you know what? You love the breakout groups. Oh, would you rather? Well, I think by the time I get you into breakout groups, we'll run out of time. So let's just use the chat or people jumping in. So let's reframe some situations that you might see in your practice and working with families. Instead of saying they were late picking up their child again, thinking about family situations, I statements, active listening, valuing passion wherever you find it. What's a way to think of a family that's late picking up their child? That's another way of that perception. So feel free to either unmute or jump in the chat and share. When you hear somebody say that next to you at work, or depending on your role, and they're like, oh, they're late again. How can you help reframe that? They may be struggling and need help. Hope everything's all right at home. They must be really busy. Exactly. Couldn't they get a ride? They were stuck at work. And then think about like all these strengths, right? They're busy. They're doing other things. They're working. Is there anything I can help with? Yes. Traffic. Right? And we don't get so angry about that. How many of you, and this is rhetorical, but how many times have you ever been late to a meeting with the family? And my guess is lots of us. And sometimes it's because we were spending time with another family. Sometimes it's because of our supervisors pulled us in. Sometimes our own children's needs come in. And we can justify in our head why we were late, and it's a good reason. But when families are late, we automatically, many of us, not everyone, probably nobody in this room, right? Nobody in this room, but others often go to the negative and make assumptions about the family's commitment, or their, that they're just not invested. And yeah, so reframing it, there's a positive intent that there must have been something happening. Exactly. We have no idea what's going on. And they're probably sometimes embarrassed or frustrated with themselves that they're late. So similar one with they forgot the paperwork. Again, for some of our families, right? So my guess is your responses are going to be similar. They probably have a lot going on. How can I help? Their homework is never signed. Let's skip down to the fourth one, because I've heard this one a few times. That parent cusses like a sailor. How would you reframe the way that you think about that parent, thinking about all the things that we talked about today? Besides, they have a creative vocabulary. I appreciate your passion, but yeah. I'm also learning, a colleague of mine has been teaching me not to say but as much and trying to say and, because but sometimes negates that. So I'm like, I appreciate your passion, and we can't use these kinds of words. And I'm not saying you ignore the cussing. If cussing makes you uncomfortable, or if cussing is not appropriate in your setting, it's okay. Again, confrontation is not about adversary. Confrontation is about being assertive and getting your needs met. They're passionate about how they feel, right? Like, this is something really important to them. Yes, cussing for shock factor, lots of passion. And some people, it's just, that's their vocabulary. They don't even realize that it's a shock factor. It's just the way they are. Because that's what they've heard and used their, throughout their time as part of their family culture. Your emphasis is appreciated. I like that. When I was working with teenagers, I basically would say to them, I'd say, if you can spell it, you can say it. I would never say that to a parent. Okay. And then how about this last one? He refuses to let their child get mental health treatment. Think about what we learned today. What would you do with that one? How could you reframe that? We've talked about passion. We've talked about the whys. We've talked about I statement. Ask why. Yeah, that's what I would start with. And I wouldn't just ask why. I wouldn't say, why not? I would say, talk to me about your concerns about mental health treatment. Are there things that have happened in the, in the past that your concerns? For some people, it's okay to ask why. But why is, I will say, if you're not familiar, they recommend anybody under the age of 10, never ask why, because their little brains aren't able to formulate. If they knew why, they'd tell you. Adults are able to do that. Any others? Can we make it easier for you? Can we have the session at school? Yeah, so you're trying to figure out what the barriers are and making assumptions about it, right? And working with the family on that. Instead of it being about refusing, it's about that there's something standing in their way and we just need to figure out what that barrier is. And Susan, I appreciate all this. Yes, breaking down the mental health stigma. And that's a whole nother session, which hopefully they'll be talking about. So I am getting the message that we have 2 to 3 minutes left. I do want to just stop and give you a chance to chat a little bit together. If there's any questions or thoughts or feedback about any of this. For me, when I like to end a session, it's one thing to go to something, and then it's another thing to actually do something with the information. It's really easy, especially on a Friday, to say this is really helpful, and then Monday comes again, you go back into your routine. So what I'd like to see in the chat just for a minute is thinking about one thing, a little takeaway that maybe you got from this, that maybe you relearned it. It doesn't have to be something brand new for you, but something that you're going to take away to say, you know what, I'm going to do a better job with this on, or this was new for me and I'm going to try this. I've got a good friend that whenever I say, we're preaching to the choir, she's like, even choirs need practice. It's okay to be preached to sometimes. So for many of you, I'm guessing, based on your commitment to attending this, some of these were not new activities, but hopefully refreshers. Yes, the conflict style. Some of you might be taking that home to your partners at home to see. Some active listening activities. I'm glad that was helpful. And versus but I'm seeing. Great reminders. Well, I appreciate it all. I also appreciate the grace and the patience. I know the technology was not perfect today. I was kind of laughing. I was talking over my tongue a few times and things that didn't quite work, but people stayed engaged and actively participated. And I'm really, really grateful. I'm also really, really grateful for the work that you do. As a social worker, family engagement is important to me. When I was working on my PhD, all of my classes were around family engagement. The work that I'm doing at Miami with the Ohio School Wellness Initiative is to really try to break down barriers and stigmas of working with families. So to know that there are people in the field who are doing this and carrying on the mission and training our students to do this just means the world to me. So keep up the awesome work. And for those of you who are families and are sharks when you need to be and here, I'm so grateful for you to taking the time and to learning with us and to sharing your experiences, because you really are the ones that are the experts. So I will let you go. I'm not sure, Beth, if there's a formal thing they need to be doing, but I've got nothing else, but I will definitely stay on as people go in case someone has a question or needs to chat after.
Thank you.
Yes. Good to see so many of you. This is like a family reunion, seeing so many names from background days and FCFCs and ESCs.
Thanks, Sharon.